Hi, my name is Emmanuel Urquieta, and I'm the Chief Medical Officer at the Translational Research Institute for Space Health, and I'm also faculty at Baylor College of Medicine in the Department of Emergency Medicine and Center for Space Medicine. My presentation will cover our institute's commercial spaceflight research program called EXPAND. EXPAND stands for Enhancing Exploration Platforms and Analog Definition. And this is a relatively new program. It started last year to take advantage of the Inspiration 4 mission, the first all-civilian orbital mission, where Jared Isaacman and 3 other civilians flew to space for 3 days. So I wanted to develop a program that could deploy research with these platforms and ensuring that this was a low burden, low mass power and volume requirements, low training requirements to the crew members. These new crew members are very different than what we have seen in the past with your astronauts from space agencies that actually that is their career. They're career astronauts. Most of the civilians that fly into space, they fly once for multiple days. Some of them might fly multiple times, but that is not really their career. So we wanted to make sure that we can optimize and take full advantage of these civilian missions. And this gives us also the opportunity to collect the information from these civilians in a high throughput fashion. So one of the characteristics of the EXPAND program are, number one, EXPAND is a space biomedical research platform that collects human health and performance data on commercial spaceflight participants. The EXPAND program, the goal of this is to create a database and a biobank so that in the future, third-party investigators can request access to this data and they can do hypothesis-driven research. And finally, the vision of the EXPAND program is to increase the knowledge base of human adaptation to spaceflight by studying a more diverse cadre of spaceflight participants. And again, the way that we designed this program, we wanted to make it tiered so that at least we ensure that some of the basic information was collected or is going to be collected throughout multiple missions. So with this in mind, we designed a research packages approach, and you can see here 3 of them. The first one is called the Essentials. This one requires a minimal crew time and upmass. And in a couple of slides, I'm going to show you what we have developed that is now the TRISH essential measures. And this is the minimum set of data that we collect prospectively mission after mission, regardless if this is a suborbital mission or if this is a short mission just orbiting the Earth. If they go to the space station, it doesn't matter the duration of the mission. We want to collect the same information so that we can compare later apples to apples. The second category is benchmarking. This one requires a little bit more crew time and upmass. And the third one is expeditionary. These are very unique projects. These are groundbreaking, and they require more crew time and upmass. And I'm going to give a couple of examples of these. But as you can see here, it is we present this menu, this research packages approach to the spaceflight participants, and then it is really up to them to decide which one they want to consent and to participate in. And the goal of this program is really to understand the whole health continuum, from before flight to after flight, trying to understand what are the health conditions in these spaceflight participants and how they could potentially impact their time in space, and what can we do even from the pre-flight and the post-flight perspectives to make sure that they stay healthy during spaceflight. And some of these spaceflight participants are actually not as healthy as you normally see in your career astronauts and your government astronauts. So this really gives us a very unique opportunity to understand edge cases and really to prepare for the unknown unknowns. So this is also a platform to increase the clinical knowledge in spaceflight participants. Now, of course, this requires working with the government, with non-government commercial spaceflight providers, and with a lot of stakeholders, both on the data acquisition, the access to the platforms, and then the investigators and the entities that will make use of data that we're collecting through this effort. So on the left side, you can see some of the commercial spaceflight providers with which TRISH, our institute, has agreements, and we're working closely with them. You can see we have Sierra Space, Virgin Galactic, Axiom Space, Space Adventures, SpaceX, and Blue Origin. All of they have agreed to work with us in the Expand program. And once we get the data into the program itself, into the Expand database, who is going to use this data? Well, I think there's a lot of options here. You can see 3 examples here. Researchers, they can access standardized data in a high throughput fashion from a diverse cadre of spaceflight participants to do hypothesis-driven research. So rather than having to wait years to collect data from people flying into space or having one-offs research capabilities, they can just submit a request and they will get a relatively large number of spaceflight participants' data. The second one are the practitioners. By this one, I mean the clinical practitioners. They could also use the data to improve the experience of these spaceflight participants as they go into these different commercial platforms, and also to improve how they will select, from a medical perspective, these spaceflight participants. And lastly, the space agencies. I was mentioning about the unknown unknowns and the edge cases. So all of these are absolutely important to the space agencies. And specifically in the case of NASA, as they're looking to go back to the moon in the next few years, the early Artemis missions, at least the transit phase, is going to take 3-4 days. And this is roughly the same duration that we're seeing in some of the orbital missions. So understanding the dynamics, the changes that happen in those missions, even though they're orbital around the Earth, they can be translated to these early Artemis missions while they have the transit to the moon. So I just want to cover our experience so far. I'm going to mention very briefly the essential measures that I was referring to in the previous slides. So our 3 essential measures is a non-hypothesis driven component. It's a systematic approach to collect standardized data across missions and different spaceflight providers. So this is basically agnostic from the spaceflight provider, from the vehicle, and from the mission duration, from the design reference mission, the DRM. And again, this is not hypothesis driven. These are the gold standard of what we collect. This is not testing the test anymore as we go into space. And these are the highest priority areas for Artemis missions as we understand the risks and gaps. So we're looking at sensory motor adaptation and space motion sickness. We're looking at cognitive performance. We're looking at actigraphy and biometric monitoring. We're using some of the clinical grade, some of the smallest footprint devices that can be used through the spaceflight participants in these missions. We're also very interested in understanding how the gene expression and the omics change during these missions. So for this, we're looking at some biosamples that we collect before and after the mission, and we process them and we bank them. And we're very lucky to work with the Human Genome Sequencing Center at Baylor College of Medicine for this specific effort. So we do things like whole genome sequencing, RNA sequencing, and storage and aliquoting of the samples for future use. And lastly, it's a battery of questionnaires. These questionnaires really provide the data to understand the changes that you could potentially see in the first 4 circles that you see here. So it's more contextual data that gives an additional layer of understanding to the data that we collect. Lastly, in the last year, I was mentioning when we developed this program, we have already collected data from 3 commercial spaceflight missions. The first one was Inspiration 4 last year. This one was the first all-civilian orbital mission. We also worked with Space Adventures on the MS-20 mission with 1 Japanese civilian flying into space to the International Space Station. And earlier this year, we worked with Axiom Space on the Axiom 1 mission. So as you can see here, in roughly 7 months, we were able to collect data from 9 spaceflight participants, which is it's a large number in a short period of time compared to what we have seen in the past with other types of missions. And in the future, we're already working with in 2 additional missions: the Polaris Dawn mission, which is going to be the first civilian spacewalk, and with Axiom 2. Both missions are planning to launch next year. So hopefully next year in this conference, I will be able to provide additional details from those 2 missions. So as you can see, this is a very evolving field with changes every day, and with the commercial spaceflight providers' participation, and we're developing a really comprehensive yet nimble program to make sure that we collect all of these incredibly valuable data for future use with third-party investigators. So that, thank you very much for your time, and I hope you enjoy the rest of the conference.